you want to learn more about effective management, head over to madssingers.com and sign up for my free management training.
Welcome to the Mad Singers Management Podcast from madssingers.com, where entrepreneurs and business managers learn and share. If you like the show, don't forget to leave a review.
Hello, and welcome back to the Mad Singers Management Podcast. Today, I'm joined by Joseph Fung. Welcome, Joseph.
Man, thank you for having me. This is going to be such a fun chat.
I am super excited for it. I think we have lots of similarities, and I think it will be a very, very interesting discussion. But just before we get started, there's people around the world who don't yet know who you are, believe it or not. So would you mind giving a little bit of an introduction to the audience about your background and how you ended up where you are now?
For sure, happy to. So again, Joseph Fung. Right now, I'm the co-founder and CEO at Uvaro. We're an online sales accelerator. We help sales professionals be more successful, but I'm a repeat founder. Most of them have been in business-to-business software companies, computer engineer by education, and I'm based in Canada. So love things tech, software, entrepreneurship, and cheering the local sports teams, of course. So that's what we are right now.
Fantastic. So, Joseph, let's talk a little bit about sales and getting good sales reps up. So I am definitely not a sales expert, and I would say that's probably the one area where I personally struggle the most in business. I hate sales, and I'm an introvert, and all that good stuff. So how do you guys typically go around it? So when you work with sort of smaller businesses, when is the right time to hire sales reps, and how do you actually go around getting them up to speed and producing?
I love how you teed up the question because I feel very similar. Engineer by training, super introverted as a person, and I can think back to my first companies, trying to deliberately acquire those skills, like going to Toastmasters, going to BNI, trying to practice the pitch, and is my handshake good enough, and all that kind of stuff. So I feel that deeply. Sales was always the hardest part of every business I've run, and I think for us, the big things that we've internalized and we've learned how to do is that, number one, getting founders and entrepreneurs comfortable with the idea that the way they sell can't really be replicated. We make that mistake. We hire someone, we say, follow me on my sales calls, do what I did. And I don't know about you, but that's never really worked for me. And we see it fail all the time. So that, and the second thing, and this is the real nugget, everyone looks for sales reps that have sold something similar before. Your thoughts, hey, I've got a consulting business. Let's find someone who's sold consulting before. And that can work, but what often works better is someone who knows the customer really well. So if you sell to restaurants and bars, well, someone who's worked in a restaurant and a bar is going to be able to sell really well. So changing your sourcing strategy can be a massive win too. And so we spend a lot of time on both of those.
I like that one. And I think because particularly people struggle to find salespeople and good salespeople, right? And typically if you find someone who is producing at a top level, they often need a lot of money to do so. That sounds like a good advice.
But even if they are producing, that doesn't mean they're going to produce well for you. The numbers are terrible. If you look at B2B sales, the average sales rep is only attaining less than 60% of their quota. That's not a win. That's not even a C. That's I think it's a real challenge. And I think there's certain job functions like engineering or finance or accounting. You can look to accreditations. Do you know Java? Do you know how to do your reconciliations? Do you know your HR legislation? Sales is different. You can't just check the list. Being able to relate to the buyer is so important. And I think if more entrepreneurs got comfortable not looking for a successful salesperson, but someone who really knows the customer already, they'd have a better hit rate than 60%.
Yeah, totally makes sense. So what do you do? So when you're selling something to restaurants and you find someone that used to work in a restaurant, how do you then hand over the sales skills to them?
Well, I mean, that's why we built Uvaro. So what we do is we have a training program that puts someone through a 12-week program. It's intense. It's 2 hours a day, 5 days a week. It's a lot of work. But we teach them how to sell primarily technology, but sell online. And then we introduce them to businesses that are looking to hire in those roles. And we put our money where our mouth is. So most of our members don't pay any tuition until they land a role. So we're telling people, hey, if you're that bartender who now wants to double or triple your income by selling online, we can introduce you to those companies, and it makes a huge difference to their lives. Because I don't mean to gloss over. Finding that bartender to sell to other bartenders is great, but they do need that training. They need to close that skills gap, and there's programs like Uvaro and others who can help do that.
Cool. Yeah, sounds interesting. And from your perspective, what's sort of the biggest challenge you see in sort of getting consistent salespeople? Like, what is your success rate, and with your system, like how does it work?
It's really interesting, and my answer is going to make me sound a little bit like a broken record. It often comes down to the fit between the role and the person. There's no single magic bullet. It's not like, hey, follow this methodology, or, use this cold calling script. And I mean, as an entrepreneur, I'm always looking for that. Hey, like, you probably look for the same things, well, what's the email that's going to have the best open rate? What's the cold call script that's going to work the best? We love these things. The best sales reps, they're always chewing and consuming these things, but still they have a 60% success rate. If you can put the right sales rep in front of the right customer, though, that's where the success really is. Like one of our members, he's a real example. He's top of mind as I've been sharing these. He was a bartender, a restaurant manager, 8 years in hospitality. After going through our program, we matched him with a company that sells scheduling software to restaurants and bars. And of course, he's doing 170% of quota, got promoted in 6 months. And his colleagues who used to sell at LinkedIn and other great businesses just aren't doing as well because they don't know the buyer as well as he does. And so, I sound like a broken record repeating it, but it is about that fit with the buyer. It's not about your product. It's not about the type of business model. It's about the buyer.
Yep. Makes sense. Makes total sense. Okay, that's good. You've built a few companies, right? So you've done some from scratch, bootstrapped and so on, and you've done some where you have had venture capital come in. So can you tell us a little bit about the difference and kind of your mindset around all that?
Yeah, I mean, I love the question, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on it too, because you're running a few businesses, and is that how did somebody phrased it really well? There's the idea of the entrepreneur, the serial entrepreneur, and then the multi-entrepreneur is doing multiple things at the same time. And I feel like we're similar in that we're doing that a little bit. I found it really interesting, that balance, like they're doing multiple at the same time. Do you find that that's different as well?
I have never taken funding to start a company. Honestly, I'm desperately against the concept. Like when you look at companies like Uber and so on, that's losing like, millions and billions and all this stuff. And, they're highly valued and all this stuff. But for me, business is about making money. If you have a business that's going to lose money for 20 years and then eventually make a little bit of profit, that it just goes against my whole way of thinking business, and I'm probably a little bit old-fashioned looking at it like that. But I'm not a big fan of that, to be frank. Now, obviously, there is always ways of that. There is situations where getting money makes sense, right? So people can need to scale for many reasons, and there's a lot to be said for that, right? But at least fundamentally for me, it's not something that I generally look for. And I would much rather, I mean, in principle, it's the same, but I would much rather find sort of smaller local private investors and so on than I would necessarily want to go out and raise like millions and millions. And for me, it's more the mindset. I don't enjoy the idea of having to raise a ton of money. Like, I think I know so many people that start a business with the goal of raising a lot of money, right? And it just sits wrong with me.
You hit something really interesting on the head, is that people start the business with the goal of raising money, and it's absolutely the wrong way to do it. I mean, raising money is not a success metric. Like having a bigger mortgage is not a success metric. It just means you owe more money, and raising money is like that. Investors expect it back at some point. What I find interesting is that a lot of folks equate success to that venture capital route, and it's just one of so many ways to finance a business. And yeah, I mean, I've been in all of them. I've done businesses where we've just bootstrapped it. We didn't raise anything. Where we did it friends and family, literally the family and what they could scrape together. We borrowed money from banks. You go and do a small business loan. We've raised venture capital. We've done the full gamut, and none of them is easier. That's the interesting thing. I mean, none of it is actually easier. The bigger the checks that are on the table, I think the more obligation you feel. So there's a lot more stress. The one thing that I will say, though, in the difference is that it does incent different behaviors. So every time we bootstrapped, we focused on revenues much earlier. And so we were more cautious in our hiring, in our business moves, and we had to be. People's mortgages were dependent on that. When we raise venture capital, it lets us make bigger risks and take bigger chances, which both means you can have a bigger outcome, but it also means you could fail more catastrophically. And not everyone is comfortable with that kind of level of failure or risk. And everybody that's listening who's an entrepreneur, they're thoughtful, they would take on risk. You're an entrepreneur, you do it. But I think it's sometimes hard to internalize. If you take on venture capital, you're all of a sudden raising your upside, but raising your downside too. And that's really tough. That can hit you financially, personally, family and friends. It's hard.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think what I see a lot, at least, is that, and this is probably what bothers me the most, is that a lot of people don't either see or look at the downsides, right? They're like, oh, well, if we fail, we fail. It's not the end of the world for me. So they look at it in that way, right? Which I just find that I find that worldview difficult.
It is.
Again, yeah.
It is. And I think, I'm not going to shy away from it. The reality is that a lot of it comes from the privilege people have. If you grow up with money, if your parents were in banking and they were successful entrepreneurs, you don't actually face the same downside. You're not worried about losing your home. You're not worried about, are your kids going to go and get an education? And so, if you fail, it doesn't really hurt you that much. And you don't know what it could mean to your family, your employees' family. And as much as, I've raised venture capital. I've got friends who are venture capitalists, and I enjoy in the space. I make my own investments. But there's definitely a bit of myopia in terms of some of the biases and the privilege that sit in there. And I think I'm very privileged that I had the chance to build companies that were bootstrapped before I ever raised venture capital. And it makes me much more aware of the consequences of the choices I make. And I worry a lot about first-time founders who have never bootstrapped a company, never had to make those choices, and they raise venture capital right away because they haven't had to face those downsides, and they can get insulated from it. It's tough.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's interesting. But again, like I appreciate the time. I mean, there's definitely a time when you have I see it a lot in e-commerce business, for example, right, where they have a great model, everything just works, but they need money to fund inventory or something like that.
Totally.
You could look at that the same way, but I look at that quite differently. Like when you first have a solid business model that is making profits, for me, that is a very different business than when you're asking people for money and you haven't figured out how to make money yet, right?
To be fair, that's where I'd say venture capital is a better fit. If you're starting a company and you don't know how you'll make money yet, that's high risk. That's suitable for venture capital. You don't want to be putting your parents' house's mortgage on that. You don't want to, sign a personal loan guarantee to a bank for that. I think the challenge is that a lot of companies that raise venture capital, they figure out how they're going to make money, and then they're stuck on. We'll often talk about the venture capital train. So you've raised some venture capital, you've figured out how to make some money, you got 20 people, and at that point, you could now grow profitably, manage it, scale it. You have investors who they need to make their numbers work. They need you to grow 10x, 100x, and they push you to grow in a way that you might not do naturally. And that's problematic. I see a lot of businesses that started off venture backed, and then they get stuck on that train of, the next round being much larger, the next round much larger. And you get to a point where the expectations just outstrip the potential of the business. And it's really hard to get off of. And so if I could change one thing, it'd be having an easier off ramp from the venture capital side of things. Easy way to do kind of a seed round or a pre-seed round, but then, moving more into private equity, not immediately into public markets, but a way to get off of that cycle, because it's tough. And those growing expectations are a challenge for so many.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's definitely an interesting situation, right? Because I know a lot of people in the space. I know a lot of people who've taken money and are on that train, as you mentioned, right? The key thing for me is they care, right? If they care about the money they've raised, that's what matters to me. When the time where I have the biggest problem is when I see people just being like, oh, well, we raised 4 million. That's not my money. So as long as I get paid, I don't care, right? Like that is what I struggle with the most, right? But yeah.
Well, I think, how to put it, I've got faith that a lot of those bad actors get found out, pretty quickly. Because you get in really close to your VC. I mean, the investors in my business, we're texting every day. We're close. When it's a rough day, they're the ones that I call up. I mean, you can't complain to your team. You can't say, oh, I don't want to talk to my team anymore, or I'm having this terrible day. This customer just, chewed me out. You can't say that kind of stuff to your team. And so if you've got really good partners, and I have faith that the investors I work with, when they talk to their entrepreneurs and their founders, they know who's having those conversations and who isn't, who just doesn't care. And
definitely,
I think the system helps kick the bad actors out pretty quickly.
Yeah, that makes sense as well. Yeah. So, I mean, you mentioned it there. You said business partners, but let's dive into the topic of business partners a little bit, because I have definitely had my fair share of interesting experiences with.
You say that like interesting is a euphemism for really, really painful and terrible.
Well, I've had some great ones, and I've had some less than great ones. Let's say it that way. So, yeah, tell me a little bit more about your experience with business partners and so on.
That's a good one. I'd preface it that I've had experiences that have been painful and experiences that have been amazing. Every single one was a learning experience. Most of the time, it's a learning experience about myself. So that's one thing I'll preface it. So things you hear people say, people will say things like, don't get into business with friends. Don't get into business with family. Don't start a business with someone you've never met. I've done all those things, and some of them haven't, and that happens. A couple that come to mind with my most recent company, where we had 3 of us that co-founded the business. We raised venture capital. Shortly after that, I was only one of the original 3 still with the company. And there was definitely a lot of pain and acrimony in that process. But I think I learned a lot from it. And I'd like to think they did too. And there's a couple, there's friendships there that weren't fully salvaged. On the flip side, with this business, same thing. We founded the company. There's 3 of us that are co-founded it. One of them is my sister. One's my, he was the best man at my wedding, so a close friend. And so, someone could look at it and say, well, so if you just made the same mistake or did the same thing again. But I think the things that can make a really big difference is when you do know somebody really closely, there's a lot of trust, and that can really help. And if each person has been through this process before, they've been through that ringer before, they know themselves better too. Because the hard part is to say, hey, when things go south, what are we going to do? We have a shotgun clause to separate. Do we say we'll vote and we'll part as friends? And most people have never actually faced that situation. So they say what they do with good intentions, but we rarely act the way we think we're going to.
Yeah, totally agree. And I would say, I mean, my best experiences with partnerships have similar, right? So it have typically been situations where I've been in business with someone that have been around the block, let's say it that way, and someone who, have experienced things. I would say though, I've also had experiences with some experienced people where things did not go super well. So it's definitely not just the experience piece, but I think, again, like for me, I do a lot of personalities and sort of focus a lot on the personality aspect of things. And I think definitely that's important, right? Like that you actually are fit. That the biggest issue I've generally had with business partners is the fact that they've been too, let's call it sporadic, or they've been too focused on, every week they have a new goal and a new plan and a new thing. Now, the thing is, in principle, that's good for me because I'm not like that. I'm very structured and so on. But reality is, when you want to start a business, you can't change the product you're selling every week, all right? And yeah, I've just seen consistently that is by far the number one issue I've had personally with business partners. Now, I'm sure that there's others that have had similar issues or maybe slightly different issues, but just from a similar angle, right? So
the interesting ones I've had when I think about issues, I don't think I've had the exact same one that you described there in terms of the kind of changing a direction or flip-flopping. For me, what I'd point to is having partners who are as kind of committed to doing what needs to be done as you are. Like, so an example is I'm a firm believer that you want to create a workplace where people can thrive, have a healthy balance. But I know that if push comes to shove and something has to be done, I'm going to work through the night or the weekend to make sure it happens. And that conviction, I'm going to do whatever needs to be done. I think it's really important to have partners who have a similar level as you. And to be clear, I don't mean you need business partners who will work all weekend. It's where you have the same level. Otherwise, you end up feeling frustrated that they're not putting the time in, or vice versa, or you're burning bridges. And when I think back to my challenges, I think that's where I've seen some of it. And when I think to our successes, I think that's where it's been so good. When one person says, this is one of those situations, we got to burn the midnight oil, or we got to double down, or we got to put some more money in, and everyone feels the same. The reaction's like, oh, I'm glad you said so. I was thinking the same thing. And that commitment is so profound.
Definitely. Definitely. And I think I like that aspect, right? Because I think in the end of the day, like there's only so much you as a person can do yourself. And I think having people to stand with you is just so critical, right? Because that in itself just enables you to push that extra bit. And a lot of the time, like when you're dealing with a small business, like it's about that push, right? Like it's about those 5% extra once in a while. Not all the time, not every day, but once in a while, you really, really have to, burn the midnight oil, and you really have to push, right?
And I think the flip side, and where I appreciate I'll call them, failure doesn't feel the right word, where we didn't have the right success, so maybe the misses, and where I've internalized a lot is it's really hard to know yourself. And I think back to one of my first businesses. There was two of us co-founded, and I mean, it started as a partnership. We didn't incorporate. It wasn't a sole proprietorship. It was a 50-50 partnership. We wanted to put a name on it. My partner's name was the name on the company. We both agreed that Fung Media just didn't have the right sound. So we used his name. And it was great. We were a fantastic balance. One of the things that we struggled with was when he went through a bout of depression and struggling a lot personally. I use these words now, and I didn't know what words to use then. All I know was that at the time it felt like he wasn't engaged, wasn't showing up, wasn't delivering. And one of the things that it took me a while to realize and reflect on was that I didn't have the right tools or the right understanding to be as committed to his health and his well-being as I do and I am now. And it's tough because I'm sure like right now, reflecting on it, I probably have a very different perception of the time and the situations during that part. And we ended up dissolving the partnership. We ended up continuing the business, and he moved on to other things as well. But talking about commitment, yeah, I think it's really helpful to think about not just the commitment we each have to the business and the time, but what's the level of commitment we're going to have to each other to deal with those. And I think those are some things that I've struggled and hopefully gotten better at over time and over businesses.
Yeah. Yeah. The other thing I've seen work as well is actually knowing people, right? So a couple of the business partnerships I've had that failed have been people that I didn't know super well. And, I was like, oh, that's a great opportunity. That's a great fit. Let's do it. Right. Yeah. Whereas successful partnerships I've had have generally been with people that, I've known for a longer period, either through networking or like friendship, or I've known them, I've seen them around other people. My first thought hadn't been, oh, let's build a business together, right? My first thought have come from different perspective. And then, eventually an opportunity comes up where you're like, okay, like the two of us could probably, or the three of us could probably build a good business together. And I think that's, for me at least, that's been what's worked the best. And I mean, I've always been crazy about networking for 20 years or so. And I really believe, like, both from a recruitment perspective, finding business partner, finding clients, partners, anything, it's so good, right?
I love that you say networking. I'd love to hear your thought on this. I find this right now, I feel like the use of the increased use of tools like LinkedIn and Twitter and Facebook and all of that have made people much, much worse at networking. And I don't know if you found the same thing, but I found like the quality of people's interactions, their willingness to look out and say, hey, how can I help you? When I think about networking, that's a large part of it. Like, how can I extend my network to help you? I feel like that has dissipated.
I think it's probably the people you surround yourself with. So my experience is people have always been pretty bad at networking.
So maybe I just had a good window.
Now, what I would say is I don't think people have gotten better at it. All right. So fair. I don't think all these great tools have made people better. I've just gone back to the UK for a while now, and I enjoy going down, like seeing the local chamber of commerce and stuff like that, and just saying hello to some people. And for me, that networking piece makes sense. Like, if someone have an exciting business, I'm like, hey, let me come down and see what you do. And like that's it's second nature to me. I want to see people. I want to experience their business. I want to see that, right? And it's just, to most people, it's so difficult. Like, and even now when like a lot of these meetings happens on Zoom, right? And people are sitting there like, oh, I don't want to say anything. And, I'm just here watching. And I'm like, people are not making it easy for themselves. Now, reality is I had it really difficult. Like, I was extreme introvert. And when I was younger, I literally started out being like, okay, when I get to the bus to work, I have to sit down next to another human being and I have to say hi. Right. Like, that was literally tough. How I started. And I did that like twice a day for 2 months. And then, then I started to say, hi, how are you? And, just gradually build on it. So I totally get that it's difficult. And the one thing I would say is that, like, I learned it because I wanted to go into management, and that's my big passion. Right. And everything I was told was that networking is number one, right? If you can't network, you're not gonna become established in management, right? So I invested a lot of time and effort, but I would say probably for business owners, it's even more important, right?
Yeah, I would double down. And I didn't have the bus experience as you described, but very, very similar in terms of that, deliberate, intentional. Like for me, it was, when I was running my first business, I was still in college, university, first year university. And so I was that kid who showed up at the networking events with the suit that's 2-3 sizes too big, and you're not quite sure how to say hi. And the two things I think made a big difference for me is I joined BNI, like Business Networking International. And I mean, there's chapters everywhere and there's tons of groups that are the same, but I found, like, the engineer in me found the structured networking sessions. Each person has to do their intro, so you get to practice. And if you screw it up this week, that's okay, because next week you get to try. And the expectation that everybody comes with something for the other members, I think that helped teach me the fundamentals. But I mean, to your work, I think what helped me get actually better at it was my mentors and my coaches. People who I trusted to give me real feedback. Like I don't know what your practice is like, but I'd love to hear how this compares. I remember one of the pieces of feedback I got really early on, and it was really creative. And one of the habits that I had when I was talking, when I was unsure, is I'd be scratching while I was thinking, like just kind of like, for those who are like listening into the podcast, like scratching your cheek or your chin, and just my hand was touching my face all the time when I was unsure. One of my coaches was like, "Hey, Joseph, one of the things you got to do is start putting your right hand in your pocket while you're talking. You're touching your face all the time. It makes you look like you're not sure. It highlights how young you are. You just keep your hand in your pocket." And I love the fact that he was comfortable giving me that feedback. And yeah, that stuff's hard. Do you see stuff that's similar at all in your coaching practice?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say so. Personally, I've had similar challenges. So one of the things I was told is you need to learn to smile, because by nature, I mean, I've friends that have known me for years and never saw me smile, right? Wow. And it's not because I'm not happy. I am all the time. I just don't show it by smiling. All right. It's not something that's natural to me. So one of the things that have taken me the longest, and I probably spent about 5, 6, 7 years or so, literally every single day walking down the street and just smiling, like literally. And the difficulty is when it doesn't come natural. Like I literally feel like a clown. Like, when I do a tiny smile, I literally feel like I look like a clown where the smile's halfway up my face, right? And it feels weird. Now, so what I've learned from behavior is that I'll never learn to be comfortable with it, but I learn to be less uncomfortable with it, right? So now when I meet new people, I know I'm supposed to smile. And therefore I do it every time I remember it. And, it happens more and more. It doesn't happen naturally, but I think less and less about having to do it, right? But I think that's probably been the biggest game changer. And I had that feedback from a few people, right? Like kind of at networking events and stuff. It looks like you don't want to be here. You look like sad, or you look like you're in the wrong place or something, right? And that made a big difference for me. I think when I look at the people that I've been coaching and so on, again, most of it is, I think, more how we approach the world, right? Like I think everyone has something to offer, and I believe that a lot of people don't feel that, all right? And I can totally understand, like many people, it's like, ooh, why would I go and bother that Joseph guy? He looks busy, and, he's a business owner. He must be important, and all that kind of stuff, right? But
we both know I'm not. It's like, when you own the business, you're like chief bottle washer, take out the garbage.
Exactly. But that's the mindset of a lot of people. Whereas I think learning to approach it from a helping perspective. So as you said a little bit, what you learn in BNI, I think for me that made a huge difference, right? So one of the things I like doing now, and I'm still uncomfortable doing, don't get me wrong, but when I'm at an event and I see someone standing in the corner by themselves, I go and talk to them, because I know that they will be so happy that I talked to them. even if they don't know what to say, I know that even I'm uncomfortable doing it as well.
Yeah.
I know they will be very happy because no one is talking to them right now, and no one like standing and staring up in the roof or whatever, right?
100%. I do the same thing. And I guess I'll double down on that. Anyone that's listening in, look for a good networking tip. At the next event you go to, go and find the 2 or 3 people that aren't talking to anyone and go introduce yourself. Because, you'll learn something new and you're helping them, and they will be not just happy, but grateful. And you're putting good energy out there. It's going to come back to you. I'll plus on that.
Definitely. And yeah, so I mean, my big one, I would say the biggest differentiator for me was definitely Toastmasters. For most reasons other than the obvious ones. So, I mean, Toastmasters is a lot of things, I would say, but the key focus is obviously around public speaking with it. I've definitely learned a lot more about that and so on. But the one thing I learned that makes the biggest difference is body language and communication. Because by nature, I can literally sit with my arms crossed and just like, I can stare into a wall and have a conversation with a person next to me. Like for me, that I'm looking at someone when I talk to them, it makes no difference. But learning how to actually make effective eye contact, how to use your arms effectively, I would say that's probably what I've noticed being the biggest differentiator. So obviously learning public speaking, I do speaking. I've done speaking in front of a couple of thousand people now, so which I'm extremely comfortable with, much more than approaching some stranger standing in a corner. But for me, the sort of body language piece of it have been a huge game changer. The other thing is, like, I've also done things like BNI, and my personal experience was not the same as yours.
It's so much the group. Yeah, like it's the group that you're part of. Yeah,
it's a lot of the group. When I go into an event and I get 3 business cards in my hand within 5 minutes, I usually turn around and walk away. That's typically my approach. So what I love about Toastmasters is that you meet a lot of positive people who are into self-development. So the concept of people who are wanting to improve themselves, they generally pay money out of their own pocket in most cases to do so. And they spend a sizable chunk of their time as well, right? I've found that those are generally people that I enjoy spending time with, right? Now, what I have experienced in a couple of the BNIs that I've visited is also some good people, but it's often this like sales. What can I sell you? What do you want to buy? Who do you know that want to buy? And it's so sales focused more than necessarily do I actually provide value to you, right? And that's the same thing I have with these business card slingers, right?
It's funny because for me, when I think about what I enjoyed most about BNI, it was that deliberate, intentional self-development. And I mean, I'm so lucky I get to be surrounded by people who have that same belief every day. Like they're investing in our business and as customers. We had a call last night with a group of them, and one of them said it really well. She said, everyone's got an education budget. Whether or not it's $10 a month because they buy a cheap book, or it's a couple $100 a month because they're investing in courses. They have an education budget, and they choose how they use it deliberately. And what I found for me was, being at Toastmasters, being at BNI, the customers I've got right now, everyone's intentional about learning, and open forums like that, there's so much knowledge exchange, and that knowledge is so valuable. It's like one of those few things that the more you give it away, the more you get in return. And that is so powerful. I love picking up new things from entrepreneurs, from people who want to develop themselves, and swapping stories and ideas on how to get better. Like you said, practicing the smiling or talking to that person who's alone. For me, my big thing of late has been to riff on your body language, like the way you use your hands on Zoom. It's like you've got this tiny little window, and if you put your hands up and you look in the mirror, you're like, oh wow, I'm like, they're right beside my face, but that's the little window we have. And our videos are all flipped. So like you say, up and to the right, and you got to go up and to the left. But I think if business owners, if sales reps are deliberate about improving each step of the way, the effect is compounding. And so the intentional improvements make a difference.
Awesome. Joseph, it's been an amazing conversation. So thank you very much for that. So before we finish off, any amazing resources or anything you haven't mentioned yet that you want to recommend to the audience if they want to improve their business or management skills?
Well, for sure. I mean, the one thing I'd share is we take a lot of the content from our classes and a lot of our videos, and we make them available online for free. So if anyone wants to improve their sales and sales management skills, they could check out our video library at ondemand.uvaro.com. And that's all free. And you can go through, all those courses. So happy to share that with the audience.
Awesome. That sounds amazing. Excellent. If people are eager to get hold of you or want to talk to you, what's the best ways of getting hold of you?
I always love chatting, so I hope people will reach out. Our website is Uvaro, uvaro.com. And me personally, I'm available on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, most social networks at Joseph Fung, JOSEPHFUNG, all one word. Hit me up, chat.
Perfect. Fantastic, Joseph. Thank you very much. And to the audience, we'll be back again next week. Thank you for listening all the way to the end.
Thank you for listening to the Mad Singers Management Podcast. Please leave a review. It means the world to us. You can also learn more about management at madsingers.com.